Welcome to the Realtor Diaries podcast. This episode is called Paperwork Pet Peeves. I'm Kim Jacobi with the Jacobi team and Century 21 Select Real Estate, and with me,
Elijah McGowan, also of the Jacobi team at Century 21 Select Real Estate. And if you would like to hear your story featured on the Realtor Diaries, you can email us at therealtordiaries@podcast@gmail.com.
Yes, once again, the Realtor Diaries podcast@gmail.com.
Yep. And we can tailor it however you'd like, anonymous, public, just let us know.
So, paperwork.
We love it.
Are you anti-paper? Are you a hater of paperwork, or medium, or like you actually like it?
It's so tough, but I think I actually like it.
I do. So for those of you listening and watching, if you don't know, there's realtors who despise the paperwork part. It's part of their job,
yes.
Right? But they hate it because it's like it takes organization and organization.
They miss the one-page days. They miss the one-page days.
But if you're a checklist type person, which I think both of us are,
yes,
then we kind of like it because you literally have to have a checklist and you're like, done.
Yeah.
You know, it's just very gratifying.
I've definitely seen myself be a little lazy on the checklist because our office basically has a giant checklist for us to complete.
Yes.
And while I like
still
that,
counts as a checklist.
It does, but the one you make is much better.
I know. Yeah, it's actually.
I should be using Kim's checklist. It's true. But what I'd like to talk about is a little bit what I've heard, like the philosophy around doing your own paperwork.
Oh, yes, versus using a transaction coordinator.
Yes. So our office recommends using a TC. Like flat out, you should use a TC, and it's a very good policy because TCs are really good at paperwork. That's their whole job.
Well, and they make sure that all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and
exactly
that way the liability stays off your back.
Yep. And at first, when I had just joined Century 21, my first 6 transactions were going to be alongside our trainer at the office and with a transaction coordinator. I didn't get a deal before joining the Jacobi team, and the Jacobi team says the complete opposite. You should run your own first 6 transactions. And I've heard that from multiple experienced realtors.
Yeah.
That you should run your first 6
with us helping you. Of course, right?
Like you run into a roadblock, you ask questions, and you get help. And there's also more than just that as a system of checks and balances to make sure you're doing all the paperwork right.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely glad that I've run 3 transactions so far.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have gained a lot more confidence doing it.
Totally.
I did 2 buyers, 1 seller.
Yeah.
Ran those transactions being my own TC. And it's definitely how you gain the confidence to, I think in the future I will want to hire a TC whenever I can.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know that I can step in and be like, okay, I can run the transaction however I need to get it done. And I know these next 3 will present brand new challenges, as they all do.
Yes.
But
I mean, you want to be able to use the the program, right?
Yes.
You want to know how to upload and how to do all the little things that have to do with the program that your company is using for the paperwork. And then you also want to know, basically, it forces you to figure out how you're going to keep track of what you're doing and what you're not, and what you need and what you don't. Because a TC, one of the best things about using one is they're like, okay, you still need this form, this form, this form, this form.
Exactly.
So you don't even have to use your brain. You're just like, oh, okay, I'll get those signatures.
I can definitely say my first one kind of felt like I was drowning. It's like I got thrown into the ocean.
Yep.
The second one, I worked a lot more closely with the checklist that was built into the program. And the third one, I had a notebook and I was literally crossing off.
That's awesome.
I was like, I need to know what's happening, especially because I was working with Emmett.
Yeah.
And we were splitting the commission. I'm like, his commission's on the line if I don't get all this right. I know, that's a motivator.
Pressure. Nice. Yeah, so when I started out in real estate, you already know this, I started out as a transaction coordinator
Yes.
for 4 different busy realtors. And so, I mean, I hadn't even been in the real estate industry at all.
Yeah.
You know, and so it was I just remember the lady who, really the first realtor I worked for, she was using acronyms. Acronyms are huge in paperwork.
Oh my God.
In real estate, right?
Okay, that's the part of the paperwork that I despise.
You hate the acronyms?
I hate the acronyms.
I love the acronyms. It makes me feel super smart.
I was like, I kind of like the acronyms, but I kind of like the paperwork, but I do not like the acronyms.
SBSA, the MCA, the SBQ, the TDS, and the ABID.
And I'm like, what did you just say? Like, okay, so I need disclosures. Thank you.
Yeah. No, so the very first agent I ever transaction coordinated for, one of the first acronyms she used was COE. And I was like racking my brain almost like a puzzle, right? Like a puzzle. You're like, okay, think real estate. What could COE? And I couldn't for the life of me figure it out. And so she's like, close of escrow. I'm like, oh, okay.
And I think maybe it's not that I hate acronyms. It's just like, it's almost the principle of the thing to get on my high horse.
Well, someday you will submit to the use of acronyms because it takes so long to write down statewide buyer and seller disclosure versus SBSA.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll get them. You'll get them.
I will bow to the acronyms.
I'll make you some flashcards. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So I had a question for this segment I wanted to bring up. Whoops, sorry. Is the green light still on? Okay. There's kind of this spectrum of realtors how in depth they go to explaining the forms to their clients that their clients have to sign.
Yes.
So on the one hand, where the realtor does very, very little to no explanation, is where they just email the forms to their clients and say, read these and let me know if you have questions.
Yes.
Right? That's not what our broker recommends we do.
No.
All the way to this side where every single document, I'm talking every single one, you sit down in person with that client or over Zoom if they're out of state or something, and you have gone through that entire document, phrase by phrase. The average realtor is probably somewhere in the middle, but what are you? What do you think you are?
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Definitely, I had a lot of trainings on the forms before my first client.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even with you guys, we had a ton of dialogue before I
That's true.
was sitting in the room doing a buyer consultation and writing an offer later on.
Yeah.
And so I actually felt really confident explaining the key documents. But one person from our office, when there was like, they were getting refreshed around August, and she knew I was new. So she was like, so she said, let's sit down and do this since I need to read these over and I know you're new. Let me pitch it to you like you're a buyer.
Oh, cool.
And so I got to sit in the buyer seat and hear it. And it was really nice to go through certain documents really in depth because we know how important this part is. And then other documents can be explained with a sentence.
Yeah.
So it is definitely valuable to read it line by line.
Right.
I think it's a lot more valuable that your realtor can explain it without reading it line by line.
Yeah. So here's an example of a document that I hadn't really read line by line.
Yeah.
This, I don't actually know what it totally stands for, but the CCPA, it's part of the purchase agreement. It's the California Consumer Privacy Act.
Advisory.
Yes.
You got it right.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going CCPA. So this is what I would say to my clients. I'd say, okay, well, this form here, and it's really only like a couple paragraphs long. It's like one of the shortest forms we have.
Exactly.
And it just advises the clients. What I had been saying was this form just lets you know that your information, your private information, is protected in the state of California. And I'm just disclosing to you that I don't sell your information.
Okay.
And then I slid the paper across the table. Well,
it's also the last form usually in the packet, just by the way.
After your hour and a half long appointment.
Yes.
That's not what the form says.
What does it say?
It says that in the process of doing a real estate transaction, their private information may be shared with entities such as realtors, lenders, title companies, and other contractors associated with the transaction. And then it says some other stuff and some other stuff. But like, anyway, so I still need to practice that and memorize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
But it does not mean that any information you give us will not go anywhere.
Right. It's like,
it does mean that we will, like, in our expertise, use it in like within our business. But still,
I just think it was embarrassing, that I was explaining this form incorrectly.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that we need to be reading the forms and explaining them in a way that it's not going to mislead our clients or basically put liability on our shoulders. Yeah.
Yep. It's important to take time to read the documents, at minimum, the ones you would like to use every day, like your offers and your listings and buyer broker agreements now.
Right.
But it's definitely important to like have in your schedule, maybe some bedside reading of things like the CCPA.
Yeah, time block, like an hour a week where you're just reading forms and practicing. CAR, I think still creates basically summaries of every single CAR form.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes the summaries were just as complicated as if you went through the form phrase by phrase. But if you wanted to borrow their summary so that you knew you were saying it right, you could probably find it on CAR in their store.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we'll talk a little more about CAR forms specifically on the news.
Yeah.
But first, let's hear what our guest has to say about paperwork.
And I'd like to welcome our guests for this episode, Paperwork Pet Peeves. This is Katy Williams with On Point Services Company. And she is basically a transaction coordinator. So if you're a realtor and you want to hire her to help you with your files, your listing files, or your escrow files, she does it all. And one interesting thing about her that she shared with us, because we asked her to, was that in her spare time, she likes to read contracts. Yep.
Kind of weird, but it's I find joy in.
I feel like we always bring someone who really loves their job.
Yeah,
like most 9 times out of 10, the people we bring on the podcast love their job. And when we ask for something interesting, they say, "I really like my job."
Yeah. Like, what's your hobby? My hobby is my job.
Yeah. Well, and being a small business owner, you kind of have to,
That's true.
Be in your job all the time. But I do find joy in it, especially when the new things come out, because it changes the flow of things. I'm like, oh, how am I going to incorporate this? Or how do I teach this? How do I make sure that I'm on top of it so that my agents are on top of it?
Okay. So. That's awesome. Do you find yourself taking like an educational role with agents sometimes?
Yes, I do. I recently, thanks to Kim, I've been starting to teach more classes with the association. And so those are open to the agents in the area and teaching forms. And I'm actually a CAR certified forms trainer. So I'm able to actually teach the forms.
That's very good.
And I've been doing educational shorts during our broker tour meeting. So I've been trying to just give snippets of things. But as things pop up with contracts during an escrow or a listing, I tell my agents, hey, just letting you know this is what's happening.
Okay,
or hey, in the future, we should probably do it this way.
And so you're like a full service TC, like you really help them handle the paperwork.
I'm not just a behind the scenes paper shuffler. I'm all the above, like making sure that we're compliant, making sure that they're feeling comfortable. And then if they have questions, they can ask me. Because I do have agents like, how do I explain this in a different way? Because they might not know how to explain to their clients. So I'm able to pass that wisdom on.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah, because I know, especially for newer agents who have been in the business like 1 or 2 years, and maybe they've got 5 or fewer escrows that they've done. One of the biggest questions is, how can I know if I'm being compliant? How can I know if I've got all the right forms and I've checked all the correct boxes? And if you're in a company like Century 21, we have a compliance manager here.
Yeah.
But there's a whole bunch of realtors
who are in smaller brokerages or they don't have a compliance manager. And that's where having a very good TC like Katy comes in, because
just an extra set of eyes in that
That's right.
point. And even with
Absolutely.
the ones that I work with that do have compliance, I'm the extra set of eyes as well. I try to catch it. I'm like,
That's true.
oh, I don't want to upload it, because then
Yeah.
I'm wasting the compliance's time
Yep.
by sending in something that's incomplete. Of course, I'm human too. I do make mistakes or
Right.
I miss an initial here or there,
Yeah.
but it gives me a chance to kind of stop it before I upload it and say, oh, here you go, make the final review. And then they're like,
Yeah.
hey, this is wrong. I'm like, oh, shoot, it is wrong.
we should
Maybe.
totally have a game where, like, you know, we can have drinks and wine and stuff, but we'll have like you versus our compliance
So
manager.
that'd be fun.
And we like,
That'd be so fun.
Stump each other,
Oh, that'd be fun.
you know?
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Because she is detailed.
She's on it.
Yes.
Here at Century.
A lot
Very
of the
detail
ones I work with are very detail
Yeah.
oriented, and some of them I'm like, yes, I got it right.
And
Good.
and having worked with you before
Yeah.
as RTC, I know that you are very detail oriented. So
And I've gotten even worse now. To be completely honest, it's
I
gotten
do.
even more, and I've added more forms that are like for my own like peace of mind.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I want this for our file, even if the other
Really?
offices don't
Yeah.
require. I'm like, no, we're doing this
Yep.
because this is what I know that we probably need to include,
yeah.
so that
Oh.
everybody's feeling as informed as possible.
Yeah, that touches on a question I had, which was, I know Century 21 has compliance requirements that aren't the same as other brokerages,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you know a lot more about that topic.
yeah.
But so with every agent you work at a different brokerage, how do you know like what their office is going to require? Like, is it just like an experience?
Just really just an experience.
Okay.
Or if I hadn't worked with them before, they'll say, oh, we need this. And I'm like, great, show me what that is and I'll figure it out.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of just a learn as you go. And then I just have a folder. I'm like, here's all the things I need from this brokerage.
Oh, okay,
and then
gotcha.
they start to recognize my name by doing so many with those
Yeah.
brokerages. So then
Yeah.
when they have updates, they'll send out emails to me saying, hey, this is the new stuff we need to have
Yeah,
added.
'cause I
Or
know
here's
you
the
work
revised
with us a
versions.
lot. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So it does help that I kind of have an in with the brokerages so
Yeah.
they know who to send stuff to.
So the name of our podcast, this episode, is Paperwork Pet Peeves. That's a mouthful. But what are some of your pet peeves as a
Yeah.
transaction coordinator? And I guess it would be what the things that realtors do that drive you crazy.
Well, yeah, it's not necessarily always just realtors. It's forms in general.
Forms, yeah.
Probably the number one pet peeve would be like on the purchase agreement. Agents just like, I get handwriting into the purchase agreement because sometimes you need to do a handwritten contract.
Yes.
Cross out handwriting.
But crossing out the legal document and saying like this section's not applicable, I'm like, no, you cannot do that. It is an enforceable document. You can't just cross it out. Or they just make changes, or like they'll submit a fully executed document. Usually I get the escrow, so it's saying it, it's executed agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they'll come back and they're like, hey, here's the RPA, and it's like change. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
we can't do that. You can't just change it after the fact.
Yeah.
If you do
Oh,
that,
God.
it's an amendment or an addendum. Like
Right.
you gotta do one or the other.
You have you seen that more often than you would like?
More often than I would like, yes, but it's not as common, but does happen. And
Yeah.
there has been a couple where like an attorney was helping the buyer who was purchasing it like
Yeah.
as a solo client. There was no agent. And the
okay.
attorney would cross things out, and I'm like, nope.
It's not what we do.
Don't
here.
do that. Nope, you can't do that. So I
Yeah.
don't know why they would do that, but they did. So it's kind of hard to argue with them about that because they're like, I'm the attorney. I'm like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
you're
So
wrong at that
what
point.
they should do is redraft the document with the verbiage that they want
Yeah.
If they're
and
as an
not
attorney.
labeled as a CAR document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or submit an addendum saying like, hey, here's the changes that I do want
Mm-hmm.
to it, because you can change the terms that are written, like pre-written in there.
Yes.
Right.
There's obviously spaces in there that you're going to fill out that are available, in the grid for that CAR says, yes, fill these out. This is where you get to negotiate that.
Absolutely.
But the paragraphs where it's pre-written, you can't just cross those sections out and just be like, this is what we want.
Yeah.
No. You can say like, we don't want that applicable or whatever it is. We don't agree to that.
On
Okay.
On an addendum. Yeah.
So that would be the proper way.
That would be the proper way to do
Separate
it.
document, say these things do not apply.
Yes.
Do you
Technically
agree?
on an amendment, right?
No. So that was actually another
Ooh.
pet peeve. So
I don't know the difference between the two.
yes, that's actually one of my other pet
Okay.
peeves is the difference between the addendum and the amendment.
Yes.
Okay.
So an addendum is to be done before you have an executed agreement. It's used as a
Oh.
negotiating tool.
Okay.
Right.
So you're able to say like, seller pays for pest inspection, all the things like that. However, an addendum doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't have a rejection section.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not signed by all parties, you can just forget about it and sever there.
Yeah.
Really?
You can.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
that's
a possibility.
where you use it as a negotiation tool. You're just making an addendum to the contract.
So if you have like a bunch of addendums to like a purchase contract, would you, and some of them are non-negotiable, would you say, okay, you have to sign these first before the RPA?
You wouldn't necessarily say that you'd have to sign them before the RPA. You would so for example, you would submit a purchase agreement to somebody and then the listing agent says, hey, we have 6 offers. So you would, instead of redrafting your offer, you would do an addendum saying, here's our new purchase price.
Oh,
or here's the new terms, and you would submit that, and then they would do both at the same time.
Nice.
So they're saying, we agree to all the other terms in the purchase agreement, but the purchase price on the addendum would supersede that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how you would do it on there. But then when you have an executed agreement, you use an amendment, which you're amending the purchase agreement.
And that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's an expiration. So the first line is saying this person submits it, buyer or seller submits it. You have 3 days to accept it or reject it. And then there's a rejection line. So you would actually make sure you have that in there and you're making actual amendment to the purchase agreement that's enforceable.
Made a few mistakes, I'm noticing.
And honestly, a lot of people do. And it's one of my pet peeves. It's just the wrong form.
Yeah, that's the only real issue is that it's the wrong form.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, technically you're not like, I'm not going to sign it. I'm not going to make them go back and redo it. If everybody agrees to the terms, we'll sign it.
Okay.
Like, would it hold up in court kind of a thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
It will still hold up in court.
Yeah.
However, it's not the proper form to use.
That's right.
And CAR says so on their websites. They have it on all of their documentation.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
that's one of them. What would be the other one? Oh, not knowing how to write the addendums, the counteroffers, or the amendments. That drives me nuts. So
Because the agent has to come up with the verbiage.
yes,
Yes.
there's like a section in there that says, what are the terms that you're either amending or you're proposing?
Mhm.
And agents like to just do run-on sentences.
No
And it's just
way.
lines like this, and I'm like, I love that you want to keep it all in this section
Yeah.
because there's only so many spaces you can use. However, it's not the proper way to write it. It's not clear and concise exactly what you're asking for. So you should be saying labeling it as 1, 2, 3, line by line.
There should be no interpretation.
No.
It should be this is what it is.
And as stupid as it sounds, put a period at the end of what you're writing.
No, it doesn't sound stupid at all because you're like, every once in a while, grammatically, it changes the meaning.
Yes.
It does.
It can.
Completely.
It
like
does.
A lot.
Yeah, and so if you don't put a period there and you're not using line by line, it's it's open-ended. It could be interpreted as anything else. So you're just like, okay, this is great.
Yeah.
And then probably the last part is not referencing the document that they're talking about.
Really?
Because you could be on an amendment. You can say, we agreed to this term in the purchase agreement, and then on this form, we don't agree to this one, and referencing say 2B. Well, I know 6 different forms in my head that all have item 2B, and you're like, great, what form are you referring to?
In one of 8 documents.
I'm like, tell me which form you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it should be labeled clearly. So it's very concise. Nobody can mistake what you're asking for.
That's right.
Okay. It sounds like, you are the consummate professional in this, I can tell. But it seems like the real pet peeve is just be specific.
Yes.
Just be clear and specific.
Maybe slow down a little bit. Because usually it's just going a little too fast.
Yeah.
And there's thought process is going a million miles an hour. I get it. You're busy. I get it. I'm busy too. However, I want to make sure that nobody is leaving it open to interpretation because you're also protecting your client by writing it out like that.
That's right.
Because if they read it and they're like, wait, I said this. And then they're like, no, I didn't. And you're like, no, it's in writing.
Well, and if let's say you're not involved in that and you don't catch it, and on the other side of the transaction, that realtor figures out a way, let's say their client wants to get out of the deal or wants they can figure out a way to tweak it to make it work for their client and not that client.
Yeah, it should always be a win-win.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
That's
it should
cool.
always be a win-win on all sides for agents and the clients, and making sure that if you're going to court with any of these documents, the lawyer and the judge isn't going to be like, what were you trying to say? Because you shouldn't be saying, what are you trying to
that is
say
not
anyways,
what you
because
want to
now
hear.
you're making up whatever you're trying
That's right.
Yes.
to think of, and it could be 6 months before, and you're like, oh, I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah, so that's
Wow.
probably one of the other ones. Oh, and then chasing AVIDs. My goodness.
Okay, tell our audience, for those people who may be watching and don't know what an AVID is.
Well, in the state of California, all agents are supposed to perform an agent visual inspection disclosure. And for a listing agent, it's due with the disclosures within 7 days.
Yep.
A lot of the time on the transfer disclosure statement, they'll check the box saying AVID to follow. And I was like, that's not correct. It's due with that. And more than likely, you've been to the house like 2-3 times already. You should have notes on what the house looks like. You're walking around just seeing what the house looks like. It has scuffs. If there's marks on the floor, like it's not over elaborate information, but you need to submit it at that point in time.
Yeah.
And then with a buyer, you need to submit it when you're submitting back all of the signed disclosures, which is normally day 17.
Send it back.
Yeah. And do yours. So you should be doing all of that at the same time, because if you're checking the box saying it's attached to the transfer disclosure statement and it's not, you're technically not following the form.
Yeah.
I get it. It takes time, and it takes some effort or planning to go to the property.
Yeah.
But CAR put it in place because they want you to say, I've physically been to the house. I've seen what it looks like. So if it's brand new, you're still going to probably find something.
And that's what you're telling them when you check the box that I have my visual inspection in there.
Yeah.
It should be in there.
It should be in there. I've got it. I've done it where I forgot to upload it, but I'm like, oh, I have it. Like, sorry.
Right here.
But otherwise, it's there. If it's attached, it's attached.
Yes.
One tip that I try to follow is if I'm representing a seller, then I will get my AVID done before we hit the market.
Yeah.
So one of the times that I'm over there getting disclosure signed or something, that's when I do it. And then if I'm representing a buyer, I'll do it at one of the inspections, like the whole house inspection or something.
Yep. And, as a TC, I try to remind my agents to do it. Or like I had one who was an agent doing broker. I'm like, can you do your AVID when you're there? And she was like, great. And she did it. And I was like, thanks for the notes. So she did it. But she was like, thanks for the reminder. I'm like, I don't want to chase you for it.
Awesome.
But it happens. So you have to chase it.
Absolutely.
Because, people forget.
Well, and it's the actual part of the contract that the agents have to do.
Right.
Besides, the negotiation part, but you physically have to go and do something.
That is the agent form.
That's the one thing the agents have to do.
The one piece of homework.
Yeah. I mean, compared to there's 60 plus documents in every single transaction. Right. So I'm asking for one form. Please help me. Please help.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming and telling us your pet peeves and also a lot about what you do, because I'm always happy to meet another professional who's better at something than me.
There's always somebody out there, I promise. There's always people that are out there that are better than me. I've learned from a lot of great people, so it's taken years for me to get my knowledge, and I'm still learning every single day, but I just find joy in it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
And now it's time for the news. Today's topic being paperwork.
Yes.
And so I'm going to start us off with basically talking about why it's beneficial to use the California Association of Realtors forms that they've come up with, or any, depending on what state you might be in, those of you listening and watching. Your Realtor Association has hired lawyers. They have, probably put together a task force of realtors who actually are in the field using the forms.
Yeah.
They've talked to consumers. So really that's kind of the main reason, is because these forms are already put together and thought through by lawyers, consumers, and realtors who are using them.
Yeah, but they aren't necessarily required, right?
No.
Depends on the brokerage, I guess.
Yeah, like our manager wants us to use the CAR forms. Although we do have a few forms that our franchise owner,
true.
has created. Like the propane addendum. I think it's
so.
An addendum.
Yeah.
Yeah, because CAR
propane information. That's what it is.
Yeah, because there wasn't a form that really said, okay, this is the name of the company we leased the tank from. This is how much gas is in it already and how much it was. And
that's just one example of one of our in-house forms, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah.
We even have in-house form versions of CAR forms.
Yes.
but like the buyer broker agreement.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think at our company, we could technically use either.
I think so.
For the buyer broker specifically.
Yeah.
It's just the buyer broker is a very long document.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Except for our company made a 1-sheet buyer broker agreement.
Yes.
Which we're thankful for. Another reason why that's a benefit to use the association created forms is because they were developed with standardized language with a variety of options to be able to be used in every situation. So, real estate transactions are complex.
Yeah.
And so if these forms you're able to tweak them to be able to be used in any situation and any angle that the buyer or the seller want to customize it.
They are surprisingly versatile.
Yeah.
Like if on the outset it feels like you're saying, oh my gosh, use these very rigid structures.
Yeah.
But the forms themselves, if you use like the systems that CAR at least has put in place,
right?
Like you put it into your file and then it drops a bunch of associated forms and then you can like click buttons and it'll change things.
Right.
They're very robust.
Yes. And then the last reason why it's good to use these forms is because, like I said, the lawyers have already gone through it. And so they are up to date on all the legal changes.
Yes.
And the new language that needs to be in the forms. Otherwise, if you want to start your own brokerage or something and use all your own forms, you could.
I mean,
but the liability on that would be huge because how are you going to stay up on all of the changes
that would be
that are constantly
ill-advised?
We get many form changes a year, probably 3 to 5, where CAR is kicking out new versions of forms or brand new forms.
There is a regularly scheduled one in June and December, 6 and 12 months.
Yep.
So even that regularly, we're getting updates to usually a lot of very important forms.
That's right.
Although it was, of course, I had to start doing real estate in a year where there were 10,000 changes. An exaggeration, but a lot of brand new forms, a lot of crazy, I say crazy, but more huge changes to forms that I had just learned.
Right. I think you almost had an advantage though, because
I was going to say.
Because here, all of us old folks who've been doing this for a decade or more, we had this way of doing it.
Then, one line added a year, just small changes.
And then all of a sudden they're like, bam, the buyers have to get a contract.
Just totally different way of doing business. Yeah. But I mean, even before that, I have some stats just related to paperwork because we love it and we hate it.
Yes.
But every thing you tell me about those forms makes me think of errors, mistakes people make.
Yes.
And so I had ChatGPT go and do its new deep research thing. And on errors specifically, under 30% of contracts between 15 and 25 get delayed due to errors.
Okay. So the escrow itself goes longer because somebody messed up on their paperwork.
Exactly.
How many?
Which is
15 to 20?
15 to 26%.
Wow, that's almost a quarter.
Yeah. So it's a little unsure because knowing those things about paperwork can be hard, I imagine.
Yeah.
But of course, the thing you'll probably hear most about is that a few percentage of them just fail because of a gross misrepresentation of what's happening.
Yeah.
Which that's a really bad one. And that might be a really good reason to hire a transaction coordinator.
That's right.
That's what a lot of realtors do for very good reasons, because not every realtor is a paperwork expert, but transaction coordinators are paperwork experts.
That's right.
and
all they're focusing on is the paperwork.
Exactly. And that's probably what is representative of why you have that huge range of potential mistakes, because realtors everywhere have really gone from running things themselves to using TCs, at least from what I've seen. But it can be kind of expensive, and for a good reason, because they save transactions every day.
That's right. Well, I know that around here, anyways, you pay like $300
Yep.
per escrow for that transaction.
But I've heard in like
Coordinator.
more expensive or maybe hotter markets, it goes up to like $1,000 for a transaction coordinator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would kind of suck in our market.
I
That
know.
would be untenable.
But that's in a market where the average home price is $2 million, then your commission,
Yeah,
will more than cover that.
I know, but it's a lot of paperwork that goes into a transaction. I have here that, what is it? So about 180 to maybe 200 pages per file, which is what we
That sounds
use.
about right.
Yep,
Unless there's an HOA,
I know.
then you add another 200 to that.
Yeah, which is crazy, but that is including the things like loan docs that you sign at title and escrow.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you can end up having signed on the buyer side about 100 pages of documents that just you signed, and then the seller signed 100, and then you might have 50 to 100 more in title and escrow.
Yeah.
It can end. It sounds very overwhelming.
Yeah.
But like, really, time spent, the realtor will end up doing at least a full week's worth of time just on paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
While the buyer, it's estimated they'll spend like 3 to 5 hours, and maybe 1 or 2 of the hours is just the purchase contract.
Oh, wow.
At least,
Interesting.
and I know we have an explanation for them where, like, the first time we ever sit down to write an offer, it'll take 1 to 2 hours.
Right. And it does.
Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. It's easier the more you do it, but of course you want to do it as little as possible.
I know. Hopefully you only have to write one offer and then you get your offer accepted.
Exactly.
But it really hasn't been that way for quite some time now.
Yes. And that's really indicative of like 5 hours of paperwork for the buyers and sellers. Maybe the sellers a little more because they have disclosures.
Yeah.
And then about a full week's worth for the agent on each side.
Yeah.
And that's probably with the transaction coordinator.
Yeah. Because we still have to explain the documents.
Yes.
And depending on your transaction coordinator, we still have to get the signatures.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot that goes into the paperwork that we all do.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? We get through it. It's the job.
So have I read every single word of every single CAR
Of course you have.
form? No, I have not.
I haven't either.
But I've read, over time, I've read most of them.
Yes.
Every
I
word.
have not read most of them.
Well, yeah. You got some catching up to do.
It's true. It's true.
But yeah.
And I'll
each
start
time.
with the EPUBs. Nope.
Actually, that's a pretty exciting read. That
You told me that. You've told me that before.
the California requires that buyers and sellers get these hazard handbooks.
Yes.
And it goes through like mold and radon and
Yeah.
blah, 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 asbestos, all this stuff.
And we get to read it as like supplementary reading. It's like, oh, this is interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of freaky though. It makes
But
you like want to
exactly.
climb into a plastic bubble and live there.
I know. And then the buyer reads it and they're like, what's radon?
I know, yeah.
Not relevant for our market.
For our area.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it does exist.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Paperwork Pet Peeves, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Heck yeah.